Gaza media reports 10 Palestinians killed and over 60 injured in Israeli fire near aid access. Spain, Ireland, Slovenia and Norway call for full UN membership for Palestine. And Trump says he warned Netanyahu against jeopardizing Iran nuclear talks. Good afternoon and welcome to the 4 o'clock news here on Qnews. I'm Mark Summers. At least 23 Palestinians have been killed and several others wounded in an Israeli airstrike on a home belonging to the Al-Qaranawi family in eastern Burej refugee camp, central Gaza. Additional casualties were reported in separate Israeli strikes, including the death of a man in south of Khan Yunis. Emergency crews also retrieved bodies from previous bombings in Abbasan al-Kabira and Gaza City's Shujaiya neighborhood. One civilian was reportedly shot dead by Israeli forces near an aid center in southwestern Khan Yunis. Gaza's government media office has reported that at least 10 Palestinians were killed and more than 60 injured over the past 48 hours after Israeli forces opened fire on civilians trying to access aid from the US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The incident occurred in Rafah, where disturbing footage showed desperate crowds rushing towards the aid distribution site, many forced to wait in cage-like lines. The aid mechanism, supported by the United States, has faced growing criticism from UN officials and humanitarian organizations. Critics argue the system is inadequate and dangerous, saying Israel continues to obstruct trusted aid agencies capable of delivering life-saving assistance at scale. A UN warehouse in central Gaza has been stormed by desperate civilians as severe hunger continues to sweep the war-torn enclave. According to the World Food Programme, 2 people were killed and several others injured in the chaos. The agency warned that unless food aid is significantly scaled up, similar outbursts of violence are likely. The incident comes just 10 days after Israel lifted an 11-week blockade, allowing limited aid to flow through the UN and US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. However, humanitarian groups say current deliveries remain far below the level needed to meet the urgent needs of the population. Workers were seen unloading sacks of humanitarian aid at Kerem Abu Salam crossing as preparations continue for Gaza-bound deliveries. The operation comes amid growing international pressure following Israel's decision to lift an 11-week blockade on Gaza 10 days ago. Since then, aid has been allowed through limited channels, including the UN and US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. According to the UN, Israel has approved around 800 truckloads of aid since deliveries returned last week. The United Nations and its humanitarian partners have raised alarm over Israel's newly imposed military-controlled aid system in Gaza, saying it fails to meet urgent needs, undermines civilian dignity and places lives at risk. The UN team urged Israel to ensure humane treatment of civilians, allow unimpeded delivery of aid and halt all forced displacement. They called for regular and sustained aid flows through multiple crossings and emphasized that humanitarian partners, including UNRWA, must be granted access to provide not only supplies but also vital services across the Gaza Strip. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has described Gaza as the hungriest place on earth, with almost 180,000 pallets of food, life-saving aid ready for immediate delivery. Spokesperson Jens Leeka told UN News that the aid is fully funded, cleared through customs, and could be moved into Gaza at scale right now. He warned that lives are being lost by the hours due to delays. The agency condemned Israel's closure of Gaza crossing since March 2nd, accusing it of deliberately starving 2.4 million Palestinians and pushing them to the edge of famine while clearing the way for forced displacement. Now, for more on this, we cross over to our newsroom where Rana is there waiting for us. Rana.
Thank you so much, Mark. And for further analysis on the matter, Meher Safi, political analyst, joining us from Cairo to know more about the situation. Welcome to Qnews, sir. Sir, how effective is the current U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid mechanism in meeting the urgent needs of Gaza's population, and what are its main shortcomings?
Good afternoon to you and to the dear viewers. Of course, there are a lot of shortcomings and a lot of incidents at the political and military level in Israel to implement the mechanism and to distribute the very limited humanitarian aid volume on 2 million Palestinians who have been suffering since the beginning of the war up till now. Once the humanitarian aid entered, they haven't been entered for now more than 3 months after closing all the crossings. The volume of humanitarian aid is very limited compared to the humanitarian needs in Gaza. There must be around 500 to 600 trucks daily entered, whether food, water, or pharmaceuticals and medicines, or consumer goods. And therefore, the U.S. Foundation and Israel might have been deliberate to distribute these aids in some border areas or completely destructed areas. Therefore, the Rafah city that has been exploded 75,000 kilometers, only a few buildings are left standing. Around 85 to 90% of the infrastructure were completely destroyed. And the Israeli military now is planning to take in the entire population, either into custody or for integration, or to search for resilience elements to be arrested or liquidated. The Israeli plan did not succeed, and the officials or the staff of the U.S. Foundation were not able to control the mass starvation and the people who are looking for a piece of bread for their children, and therefore there was a chaos. Israel was well aware of this chaos, and they knew that it was going to happen, and large numbers of the population would actually go for these very limited aid that is not even a drop in an ocean for compared to the humanitarian aid.
Got your point, sir. Sir, what impact does Israel's 11-week blockade and the new military-controlled aid system have on the humanitarian situation and civilian dignity in Gaza at this point, sir, which is a very critical point?
The starvation policy adopted by Israel, along with the killing by shelling policy, is very serious, a violation to all human rights, and there has been no humanitarian aid entry for more than 3 months now in the Gaza Strip. The starvation spread, and we have a lot of malnutritious kids, and the elderly are dying due to the lack of medicines and lack of food. Pregnant women now are undergoing abortion or even death due to the lack of food and proper nutrition. Newborns and young children were not able to survive because they did not receive the vaccines they're due, and there's also lack of clean water or clean drinking water. All that is there in the Gaza Strip is only sanitation water that is barely usable, and also the hospitals, most hospitals are now out of service due to the bombing, and therefore Israel is deliberate to destroy any form of infrastructure, and especially the hospitals, and they forbade the entry of any medical equipment, including ambulances and social protection staff. And the ambulance incident where 15 social protection staff were killed in Rafah is an example of the Israeli violations, as they hindered the humanitarian aid access, which impacted 2 million Palestinians living now in starvation and constant killing by the Israeli powers. And all of that is only political pressure by Israel to force the Palestinian population to evacuate the Gaza Strip and displace, and then take control over Gaza, as stated by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu, following their plan to occupy the entire territories of the Gaza Strip, evacuate its people, and minimize their lands. And therefore the campaign or the Israeli military scheme in the Gaza Strip now only aims to have two objectives. The first, starving the population to evacuate, and second, to occupy the entire territories of the Strip, eliminating the resistance altogether and disarming them. All of these objectives have failed, and so far, in spite of the starvation and the constant killing, the Palestinian population want to remain on their lands in spite of the lack of food and water, as the Israeli occupation targets that, particularly Israel targeted 63 community kitchens that used to provide food for mass populations, which means that they only want to either kill the population or evacuate them. Targeting these community kitchens is a systematic Israeli scheme that is deliberate. Also targeting the food storages and the UNRWA storages was a deliberate goal, and it was thoroughly planned, and not assigning the aid distribution to the UNRWA was pre-planned by Israel and the United States to undermine the UNRWA role, which is the only entity able to distribute aid inside Gaza. And they have the capable, talented staff to work all over Gaza, and therefore Israel targeted them and targeted the Gaza Strip from several military and social and even demographic aspects.
Sir, your analysis, of course, fully explains the Israeli plan. We thank you very much, Mr. Meher Safi, political analyst, for your informative and valuable insights and knowledge. Thank you very much for being with us on Q News. Back to Mark Summers in our studio. Mark.
Thank you, Rana. Rana Al-Qasas there in our newsroom. Now, Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid is urging Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to immediately and publicly accept a ceasefire framework proposed by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. Lapid offered his political backing for the deal, even if far-right ministers like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich oppose it. He wrote on social media platform X that Netanyahu has a full safety net to move forward. The proposal reportedly includes a permanent ceasefire, Israeli troop withdrawal from Gaza, and unrestricted humanitarian aid access, all of which Hamas has agreed to in principle. Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has declared that halting the fighting in Gaza would be a historic mistake, firmly rejecting any military truce. He warned he would resign from government if his clear red lines, known to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, are crossed. Ben-Gvir also stated there is no current deal to secure the release of all detainees and claimed that Israel is moving further away from freeing the remaining captives. He stressed the need to continue military operations to achieve victory. Meanwhile, global advocacy group Oxfam International has accused Israel of erasing Gaza itself amid its ongoing military offensive and mass displacement orders, urging world powers to exert stronger pressure to end the siege. The UK-based charity highlighted how Israel's campaign has forced civilians into just 5 zones, covering less than 20% of Gaza's territory. Combined with a blockade on essential supplies, Oxfam argues that it's not merely a fight against militants, but a deliberate campaign to dismantle and depopulate Gaza, which it calls a war crime. Oxfam added that displacement orders follow a clear and calculated pattern designed to herd civilians into shrinking, dust-choked enclaves that offer little protection and remain vulnerable to Israeli strikes. Hamas has denounced Israel's recent approval of 22 new settlements in the occupied West Bank, calling the move a blatant challenge to international will and a serious violation of UN resolutions. In a statement, the group urged the international community to take concrete action against what it described as policies of annexation and settlement expansion, labeling them a war crime. Last year, the International Court of Justice ruled that Israel's ongoing presence in the occupied Palestinian territories is unlawful and must end as rapidly as possible. French Foreign Ministry spokesperson Christophe Lemoyne has strongly condemned any Israel attempt to annex the occupied West Bank or Gaza Strip during a Paris press conference. Responding to Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement about occupying the West Bank if France recognized Palestine, Lemoyne reaffirmed France's long-standing opposition to colonization and annexation. He also highlighted the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, pointing to recent scenes of desperate Palestinians at aid centers as evidence. Palestinians at aid centers as evidence of sufficient aid. Lemoyne called for the unrestricted flow of large-scale humanitarian assistance into the besieged Gaza Strip. Spain, Ireland, Slovenia and Norway have jointly called for full United Nations membership for the state of Palestine, describing it as a vital step toward achieving a two-state solution. In a joint statement, the countries reaffirmed their commitment to a viable Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. They urged the international community to support Palestine's recognition, UN membership, and a comprehensive peace agreement with Israel. They also emphasized the importance of the upcoming high-level conference on June 17th as a key opportunity to advance peace efforts and break the cycle of violence. The UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, Michael Fakhri, has condemned Israel's actions in Gaza, stating they have pushed the enclave to the most dangerous stage of starvation, with long-lasting consequences. Fakhri described the situation as genocide, starvation, a crime against humanity, and a gross violation of human rights. He accused Israel of deliberately inflicting maximum damage and high civilian casualties to advance its goal of occupying and annexing Gaza. Since October 2023, Israel has used starvation as a weapon, according to Fakhri, while blocking and attacking humanitarian aid convoys. He also highlighted the international courts recognize this crisis as genocide, referencing ICC arrest warrants issued against Israeli leaders for the use of starvation as a war tactic. Gaza faces a dire humanitarian crisis amid relentless Israeli strikes, mass child casualties, famine warnings, infrastructure collapse, and stalled diplomacy as reconstruction hopes rise with Egypt's $53 billion recovery plan.
The Gaza Strip remains engulfed in a deepening humanitarian crisis exacerbated by intensified Israeli airstrikes and ongoing military aggressions. According to UNICEF, more than 50,000 children have been killed or injured since October 2023, a figure that surpasses previous estimates and underscores the immense human toll of the conflict. The World Food Programme has issued a dire warning about impending famine, citing 8 blockades that have caused food prices to skyrocket by as much as 1,400%. Compounding the crisis, the collapse of essential infrastructure has led to the daily discharge of over 130,000 cubic meters of untreated sewage into the Mediterranean Sea, raising serious environmental and public health concerns. Diplomatic efforts are ongoing, with UN envoy Steve Witkoff facilitating negotiations between Israel and Hamas aimed at securing a potential ceasefire and detainee release agreement. While there has been limited progress, several critical issues remain unresolved. In a parallel development, Egypt has unveiled a $53 billion reconstruction initiative. Backed by a coalition of Arab leaders, the Egyptian plan prioritizes rebuilding the territory while ensuring that its population remains in place. Gaza stands at a pivotal moment, caught between escalating violence, deepening humanitarian catastrophe, and fragile diplomatic overtures. The role of the international community is providing aid and supporting reconstruction efforts will be essential in shaping whether the region moves toward recovery or descends further into devastation.
US President Donald Trump has said that he had warned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week not to take any steps that might jeopardize ongoing nuclear negotiations with Iran. Trump told reporters he advised Netanyahu that such actions would be inappropriate given how close the talks were to reaching a solution, though he cautioned that the situation could change quickly.
Well, I'd like to be honest. Yes, I did. Next question, please.
Mr. President, just last on sanctions.
I did, yeah.
That's almost all we have time for right now, but here's a recap of this afternoon's main headlines. Gaza media reports 10 Palestinians killed and over 60 injured in Israeli fire near aid access. Spain, Ireland, Slovenia and Norway call for full UN membership for Palestine. And Trump says he warned Netanyahu against jeopardizing Iran nuclear talks. And that's all for our news bulletin for this hour. But don't forget, you can follow Q News on our social media platforms at QNewsEGY. Thanks for watching and have a very nice afternoon.